Hello, everybody. Welcome to I believe this is the sixth or seventh, yes, session in the Horizon Knowledge Series. This one is covering capital planning and budgeting for facilities maintenance. This one's a bit longer, so we're probably only got 5-10 minutes at the end for questions. As usual, if you have any questions, save them for the end or submit them in the questions or chat boxes. I will get to them at the end. Or if we miss any at the end, feel free to email me. My email will be at the end of the presentation. You can contact me and I can set you up with Sean. Just another reminder that all of these are being uploaded to YouTube. If you go to the registration email that is sent out, it is right at the bottom saying with a link to where all the recordings are available. You can watch them all, share them with your team if anyone's missed them or if anyone else would find value in them. So as we're waiting for the last couple of people to file in, I will hand the floor to you, Sean, to cover capital budgeting and planning for facilities maintenance.
Thanks, Iain. And hi, everyone. I'm Sean Benson. As Iain said, this is our sixth time. We've been talking so far about quite a few different topics. We've talked a little bit about making communication easy in terms of setting up services in your facility system. We've talked about assets and asset management. We've talked about assets in BIM models. And we've talked about reactive and preventive maintenance. And today it's a continuation of that discussion of asset management in Archibus. The discussion is around replacement or renovation of assets, which is usually governed by capital planning and budgeting routines. So we're going to be talking about both the capital budgeting and capital project management and a little bit of condition assessment applications today to discuss this. In the next couple of sessions, I think we have lined up compliance and also topics on space and portfolio, and we'll get into real property and real property income and expenses as well. So as usual, we'll just talk a little bit about project management and capital planning and the opportunity we have with Archibus, and then we'll try to hop right into the the steps that you take in Archibus to manage capital plans and projects. I've broken those steps into three pieces. One is the kind of a setup step that you would take at the initiation of setting up Archibus for capital planning and project management. So there's about 5 or 6 steps that you would do one time, and then once you've done that, you can move on and kind of do your day-to-day operations of capital planning and project management. So the second set of steps are about capital planning and then your day-to-day operations and management of projects. So we'll talk a little bit about those as well. So sorry for the grainy picture, but I really like this picture when it came to talking about the reason or the need for an application like Archibus when you're talking about capital planning and project management. And of course, everyone's capital budgets are under constant strain, whether it's from the new budget this year and you're concerned that you're not going to have enough in that 10% increase for the next year to cover all of the expenses that you have. Or whether it's a matter of communicating about the project. So the question I have usually for clients is, how do you communicate, not justify necessarily, but how do you communicate all of that change to finance and back and forth? And what I find is most customers have a financial system which will be tracking, project spend and capital budget and so on. And most organizations have project managers and project management applications that manage the day-to-day details of their project. What's missing is an easy way to translate the information that's happening in the project system into the finance system, and a common platform to review all of that information. Because when we're talking about project management, we're talking about all of the different things that hit on facilities. The project management includes maintenance work orders. It includes obviously the projects themselves. It includes space plans and area measurements. It includes facility costs and all of the different facility services that you're going to make available to customers. And a lot of that right now happens manually through emails, through Excel spreadsheets, through large documents that are presented once a quarter or once a month even. And the problem is what you have here with project management, which is there's often a mismatch between finance and the actual project execution, whether it's mismatch of time and schedule or cost of the project, cost overruns, or just an understanding of what was meant in terms of scope of each project. So for me, this picture is quite a good representation of what you're trying to do with a system like Archibus, which is you're trying to eliminate the communication gap, and you're trying to bridge that gap and hopefully get to these two groups of people, finance and operations talking to each other and being updated on a regular basis. And I think when you use a system like Archibus to do this, and it doesn't have to be Archibus, it can be almost any system, right, that you use, as long as you're integrating these systems together, you're going to be able to help communication occur, and obviously that will help planning go better. But ultimately, where you have this opportunity to increase your transparency in capital projects and in the spending that you're doing by generating data-driven plans for all of your annual budgeting, for tracking and comparing the progress of work completed versus the work invoices, and not just by project, but across the portfolio. So you can keep track of what's going on at any given time, and ultimately bridge that gap between operational project management, which your PMs are responsible for, and then the strategic planning and financial groups that are also responsible for maintaining their budgets and everything else. So the nice thing about Archibus in particular is that it's going to give you access to all the FM and facilities data at the same time. The question has to be, before you jump into Archibus project management, or before you even beginning to look at a presentation like this one, is what is a project? We have to kind of define that. And the reality is Archibus doesn't really care about a project. Archibus has tried to implement a lot of best practices from project management and data standards for project management into its system. So in terms of the data, what you're going to have is a consistent data schema for managing projects. What I've got on the screen here is an image of a project I was involved in recently. It's a smart city project, and it has all of these different things: smart car sharing, smart visitor, digital building experience, smart water and leak detection, an integrated facility management system, which was Archibus in this case, and everything else smart. And you'll notice that these individually are all projects, but if you'll notice there on half of these, there's a little green identifier here, and that identifier is a number, and it's the same number. Well, that's because a lot of these, or half of these, all fall under this organization's one particular project, capital project. And the capital project for this organization is somewhere between $10 million and $100 million. That's for one project. So they look at this as one project that they're going to have to budget for, and they have a whole bunch of other ones. Now that's a huge scale in terms of most customers that I work with. Most customers don't have a starting point of 10 million going up to 100 million. You don't have a budget like that. Most customers are lucky to have even 10 million in their entire capital budget for the year. So what defines a project in Archibus is really yourselves, your organization, and the mission that you have. Generally speaking, you're going to have projects that fall within your operational budget, and then you're going to have projects that fall within your capital budgets. And the differences between those are often just either the type of expense that you're going to keep track of, or the threshold of the project itself, right? So oftentimes any projects below a certain threshold, let's say $10,000 or lower, they don't need capital planning or capital approvals because they're going to be executed out of the operational budget. So those might be operational projects. Those can be things like condition assessments, maybe move projects, minor works projects. Even in some cases, a lot of our customers will use work orders in Archibus to manage those minor projects that are covered by operational contracts or whatever it might be. So you can use project management for those things, but you can also use project management for large scale capital projects. So those projects that go over that $10,000 threshold, or even a higher threshold, or a higher threshold beyond that, where you need to get in additional approvals from finance, from the CEO in some cases, and so on. So you define a project in Archibus, and you have to keep track of the type of project that you're defining, because ultimately Archibus doesn't really care what kind of project you have and how big it is. What it's got is basically a process, a standard process, and a standard set of tables that allow you to develop a consistent set of data for your reporting. So if you look at this, you should probably take a snapshot of this because I can't go into detail, but there's basically two types of projects. There's your capital projects, which need to go through an annual budgeting process and need to get a baseline budget approved and issued, and then the budgeting process closed out. And once that process is closed out, let's say for those large scale, $10 to $100 million projects or whatever it might be, once that gets closed out, you can develop your either smaller operational projects, or you develop the sub projects that you want to break those large projects down into. And again, you go through kind of a standard Archibus process of requesting a project, approving it, issuing it, and completing it. So those are the standard steps involved in every single project. In terms of the data, what you're also getting is a way of keeping track of project budgets, individual contracts, or what we call work packages or design packages. And within those packages, all of the detail actions that have to be taken, recorded and tracked as part of your project. And I don't know if you know this, but obviously if you have maintenance management in Archibus and space planning and everything else, the service desk application, then those action items can generate work orders, work requests, moves, and everything else that you're going to do in those operational applications. So your project management application, Archibus, acts as an umbrella to a lot of the other applications, and you can link these things back to your projects and push data back and forth between them. So this is nice. Now, having said that Archibus provides data consistency, the other thing it does, and which is going to differentiate it from a project management solution like Primavera or something, is that it's automatically integrated with your FM services. So your service desk services that we talked about earlier, you can create a catalog of project-related items like we have here. For example, in this case, we had a customer identify that they have a capital planning process request that they allow their customers, their business customers to access, and that capital planning request allows you the creation of a new project or subsequent actions, or maybe just consulting on a construction project. And this kicks off a request in the system, and we've made it so that that request then becomes a project, and you fill out all the project details in the system. Not only that, all of your space surveys, your space plans, your AutoCAD drawings, your BIM construction drawings, your asset information, that's already in Archibus as well. So a lot of the day-to-day data that you're going to be affecting with your project, it already exists in Archibus. So you can kind of collect that information in one place and then give access to different types of information, either to your project managers, asset managers, construction teams, or even the financial teams who need to be accessing all the same information that you are. So the key when you start using Archibus is to think about how to set your own processes up in the system. And there's an out-of-the-box set of processes, right? Creating projects, requesting projects, approving, issuing, completing, which is going to help you make your data consistent. And then there is going to be whatever else you need, right? Which is probably going to be some kind of a custom configuration, maybe even custom workflows that you're going to set up in Archibus. And this is where, Archibus kind of doesn't have a series of SLAs that you can set up out of the box. Every single client has different thresholds, has different ways that they want to use project management. So you're going to end up, putting together your own processes and deciding what views, what data you want to use. To do that, there are partners in the Archibus community who created things like a workflow design process specifically for project management. And here's a couple of images for those, where you can add all sorts of steps into a process. You can have multiple conditions, or as we said, thresholds, which will kick off approval requirements. And then you can build this with these kind of add-on applications for specifically project management and the SLAs. And as you can see on screens that they've created, they've got different approval levels and budget item levels for each of those steps. So you can make quite a bit of customization with Archibus, and it doesn't have to be very difficult for that. But the key is to identify what it is you're trying to do with this system that's going to bridge the gap between finance and operations, and how you want to use it and what part the Archibus application is going to play. Once you've done that, you can configure Archibus to kind of play that part, whatever that might be. So let's talk about the steps that we go through that you're all going to kind of think about when you're going to use the capital budgeting and project management applications in Archibus for your capital planning processes. As I said, there's a part one, which is the setup. This is something that you do initially. You don't have to go back and do it over and over again, except unless you want to update the budget numbers each year. But basically, there's 5 steps here that you want to kind of consider. One is to define program types, with things like this is basically your organizational mission for going sustainable, renewing your buildings and infrastructure, expanding buildings and infrastructure, any of these types of programs that you're going to kind of report on and carry out. Then, of course, you have your actual programs. These are more kind of specific, as we said, the smart meters initiatives, or your IFMS initiative, the smart parking initiatives. These are all going to be programs that have kind of a start and end date, and then multiple sub-projects below them. And these are typically kind of annually identified with a time frame and maybe even a location-based initiative. So programs are what you kind of use to collect and report on projects and also allocate funding to projects. Then, of course, you need to have funding sources, which in many of your cases is simply just a capital budget that you're going to get from finance every year. But it might be government grants, it might be additional spending that you have available to you, loans, those types of things you can identify as funding sources for allocating across your capital projects. And then, of course, for the project management itself, you want to know project types, the types of projects that you run typically, whether it be renovations, new builds, assessments, moves, whatever it is that you're trying to manage. And I think the nice thing about Archibus is you do also have something called a project template, so that when you go and request a new project, you don't have to fill out all of the details, all the contract packages, all of the individual action items every single time. You can create a template, and then every time you use or ask for that project, you can automatically generate a series of records in the system, and which basically you just have to update the dates and the costs of. So these things are quite useful in terms of setting up the system. Next is going through a capital planning process for those large-scale capital projects that you need approvals for. And in that case, there's again about 5 steps that you want to focus on. I'm not covering every single thing in Archibus today. This is project management is a big topic, but in general, I'm trying to cover the things that you want to focus on or do, by default. So generally speaking, a lot of your capital planning will come from performing a regular condition assessment. And I know you probably can't do that every year, although you'd probably like to, but as long as you're doing something regular, every 3 years, every 5 years, you'd be generating all of the deficiencies that you have on your properties, and then using condition assessments to prioritize those deficiencies. Once you prioritize them, you can group them together and submit them as a project request for the next budgeting year. So step 2 is to submit those project requests, and that's where you add your project details, your project budget requirements, any initial baseline estimates that you have, class 3 estimates, and you can do that before step 3, which is then to go through the capital planning process of allocating all of those funding sources to your different projects. Once you've done that, as you get into November, December, prior to the next year, you're going to have to go through an approval process for funding and execution of certain projects, and you're going to figure out which ones you'll have to defer. And then finally, you can monitor and manage those projects and the budgets and the spend of each of those. So that's the capital planning piece that you'll generally go through on a yearly basis, right? An annual basis where you go and track the funding for the projects, and then the monitoring happens over the course of the year as often as you need, because ultimately, like I said, you're trying to get these systems communicating regularly, not just once a quarter, but anytime someone wants to see what's going on with a project, they should have a system like Archibus where they can go and find out what's going on with a particular project, no matter who they are. And then lastly, of course, is Archibus's ability to monitor the day-to-day operations of every project from a kind of an umbrella view of a portfolio view of those projects. So I call this monitoring spend, because we're thinking about this from the capital planning point of view, but really what it is about managing the day-to-day projects, updating what's happening with the scope, with the costs, and then making sure that you're not going over budget and making sure that your finance team is going to be okay with whatever change comes about, whether it's a change order or anything else. And again, there's about 4 or 5 steps that you'll normally be doing here, which is to define your sub-projects and work packages, getting your contracts outlined, estimating the actual design costs in your class 2 estimates, and then going in and issuing your projects. And we have a console for that in Archibus, which you generally use just like everything else to manage your day-to-day work. And so you'll use the project management to execute those projects. And of course, the important thing here, I think the important thing for this type of platform, is to make sure then that your project management teams and their applications are updating Archibus with status updates, with cost updates, with change order changes, And then Archibus then updates, or the financial system updates Archibus, and sometimes it's vice versa, each other with the spend or the invoiced payments or the approved invoices. So however you want to kind of communicate that information, you want to make sure that you set up a place for those systems to talk to each other. So it's not necessarily a step that you would take. It's really more of a step that you want to make sure is happening in the background when you have these systems set up. And then, of course, regularly monitoring your projects, and then, of course, closing the projects out. So let's very quickly, or if I can, go through as many of those steps as we can in the next 10 to 15 minutes, and try to show you how to do those steps. So I'm going to switch over to Archibus here, and we'll start with the basic setup. Now, normally I don't like to do a kind of jump into the background details of Archibus in the presentation like this, but like I said, this is a training kind of a series of sessions, so we want to make sure that we're going to go through those steps in the order that you would go through them as well. So in terms of setting up Archibus for capital planning and project management, you would start under the capital project management domain. And just like anywhere in Archibus, you probably have a couple different places that you can go to set up what you want. So I'm going to start with a capital budgeting application because it does have a couple of additional options than projects. But just like anywhere, you go to the background data, and this is where you start with some of those main steps. So the first step I said was to define overall your company mission and program types for capital project spend. So you click on define program types, and you'll find that this is not very difficult. You'll simply enter in a program type with a name, give it a description, and this becomes a way for you to report on the money that you're spending on different programs. So program types is quite simple. You set it up, you do it once, and you kind of leave it there and get it out of the way. The next thing that you want to set up is probably the programs year to year. So you'll kind of revisit this every year or so to update what programs you're actually going to be spending money on. And that you're not going to find here under background data because it is more of a regular routine that you would do. So you'll find that somewhere else, whether it's be under, I think it's under here under budget. I think it's also under request. Yeah. So there's an add or edit program view. Once you've set up your program types, you can define the individual programs. And all that means is, you're giving you're identifying an initiative that has a time frame and a location potentially, and you're going to identify that initiative and its subset of projects. So you'll have a program number, program type. This is where we set up those types here. That's where that comes in. And then you're going to have whether that program is currently active, when it was initiated, what the location of the program was. So Archibus by default will identify sites with programs. Now you don't have to fill out the site, but you should fill out everything else just to have an idea for when these programs will start and finish. And of course, just like the projects themselves, the overall program has a goal, it has a scope, it has certain objectives, and an overall summary that you want to fill in, again, just for kind of background information and reporting at the end of the year. So that's step number 2, to fill out your programs annually. Step number 3, in my opinion, is to make sure that you have funding sources in the system. So for funding sources, if you go again into the background data, you'll find funding sources down here at the bottom. You'll want to make sure that you enter in your funding sources for each available year with the amounts that are going to be available. So you might, the easiest funding source might be capital budget 2024, capital budget 2025. You'll identify the funding type if it's specific to capital expenses or operating expenses. This is where you can associate funding if it's specific to a program or not. As I usually say with people, just because this field exists doesn't mean you have to use it, but the more that you kind of connect things together, the more your reporting will be kind of beneficial. If you have a source type, you can identify the source of the funding. So it might be just your standard budget or contracts, general fees, government grants, that type of thing. And then of course you make your funding with a start and end date. So you have the date that it becomes available and the date that the funding ends, and then the actual amount of the fund itself. So if you want to go further and identify that fund is only available for certain organizational units or certain locations or a funding order, you can identify that here. You'll also notice that each of your funds should be set up with the fund availability per the year. So if you have $50 million available in total for 5 years, you might want to break that out and say, well, I've got this fund available in 2022, and I'm going to have 10 million available in 2022. I don't know if that's 10 million or not. And then, 10 million available in 2023 and so on. So you start building up these amounts that you have available each year in the budget. So that you can kind of identify third. Fourth, you're going to define the types of projects that you're going to be funding within these programs. So there's also something called project type, which you go in, again, Archibus already has some types out of the box that work with specific applications, like the assessment type, like the commissioning type, the move type. These three that I'm showing you, these are specific types that are used by different applications to filter out projects within those applications. But then of course you have anything that you want to set up as a type: renovation, property acquisition, a repair, whatever it might be. These are all different project types, again, used for reporting at the end of the day. So that's step 4. And then lastly, for Archibus project setup is defining, as I said, template projects. So if you click on defining template projects under background data, you can go in and create what you see here are a list of kind of templates that you can use to request every single year. So this particular example is of a new construction. It's a detailed template. As you can see, it comes by default with a standard budget, standard set of days, standard type that you're going to use. If you have documentation that you want to include as part of the documents that you fill out, you can upload some documents and of course fill out the description. What makes them a nice template is the fact that you can then identify what Archibus calls a work package. I like to call them contracts or design packages. But basically what they are is a grouping of tasks that are going to be performed by one group or contractor. And in this case, for example, there's a package for project management. And that basically the packages are just these kind of subsets of the project, of each project that you normally kind of keep track of, and you want to be invoicing or maybe even bidding out separately to different contractors. So the work package is a way of basically creating bids for contractors so they can bid on, and then ultimately the contractor bids that you award will become the contracts. Down below that is the project task. So Archibus is very similar to any other project management application in that it has a project record and it has tasks associated with the project. And this is how Archibus kind of transmit data to other systems, is by using a very similar format to them. So in each action, which is included as part of the project, you'll have all of the detail of the project. So for example, you'll have action types, baseline estimates, so those are your class 3 estimates, documentation, descriptions, and these go into, there's a whole lot more description down below once you actually generate a project request, which you'll fill out. But this task is going to be your low-level task that shows up on all the Gantt charts and other things that are available in project management. So once you've set up these 5 things, the program types, the programs, the funding sources, you've got your project types for reporting, and you've got your project templates to make it easier for people to make requests. Now you're ready to kind of start using Archibus, and you can use either for management of projects day to day, or capital planning and what I call funding allocation. Funding allocation is what Archibus is basically what the Archibus capital budgeting application does. And so what we'll do is we'll start with that capital planning process, which is the second set of steps. So once you've got your project set up in the background data ready, for capital planning purposes, you'll generally do a condition assessment or a regular condition assessment of your property and your assets. So I can't go through all of the condition assessment application, but with Archibus and condition assessments, you generally create these assessments where all of these items will ultimately identify deficiencies that you have. So here we have a deficiency. I'll just click on something like unacceptable issues. So here we've identified a series of electrical issues that are either life safety or code compliance issues that are unacceptable. They have an estimated cost, they have a time frame that they need to be completed within, and as you can see here within the condition assessment, you can identify these things, and you can choose either to generate work orders to get them fixed right away, or if you find that that all of this work is going to be over that threshold for capital projects, you can group them together and generate a project instead. So what I always recommend is that you take that assessment data, you go into your capital budgeting application, and you, as part of your request of a new project, you can actually copy these assessment items into projects as project tasks. So all the information that you gathered or captured during the assessment, instead of having to re-enter it somewhere else, you can actually be copied over into a new project. So again, you would set up your project, and then you could go to your assessment, and you have this functionality where you can copy these items into an existing project, or you can add a new project within the system. So that would start generating your series of requests for the next planning year, and that would allow you to kind of start creating projects and filling out some of the details of the requirements. And what you're doing is you're using real data. You're using real things that you've identified that need to get taken care of, and you understand the priority of those things. So the scope is also well understood if you start like that. Now, there might be other projects, let's say, that don't come from an assessment. Let's say you're building a new building, you've got a new construction project. In that case, what you're then going to do is generate, is what I would call step 2 in this situation, which is to generate new project requests. So either within the capital budgeting or the project management domain, or even within the condition assessment domain, you're able to request a new project. And what that looks like is this. You again kind of choose the project name that you want to create. I'm just going to create a random one here. I'll try to spell it correctly. And then the requested start date, the end date for the project, I'll just choose anything here. And then here's where you can choose the type of project, which you have to do because later on you're going to be reporting on these things. And also you can choose the template. So if I choose a template now, for example, for a renovation, I'm going to choose the basic renovation template. Then what the Archibus does is it generates a new capital project request into the system, and it fills out all of the basic details. And then all I have to do is go in and put in, update the cost budgeted, the program, whatever other information I need that wasn't a part of the template. And as you can see, this project currently is created. So this project can now sit in the system as created, waiting for you to add detail to it until you're ready to submit it for the capital planning team to review. As part of the template, you also have, as I said, all of those work packages and tasks already filled out with WBS information, everything else, estimated costs and baselines and dates that you're going to want to use to provide to the capital planning team for an overall idea of scope and cost and time frame. So this is kind of this project template is kind of a nice feature to get you up and running very quickly with these project requests. But once you make the project requests, then it's important that you get in some of the required information that your capital planners need, which might mean estimations of class 3 estimates, for example. So there's a bunch of different views in here that allow you to update the project and the details prior to getting approval. And one of them, for example, is estimating baseline costs. So in our case, I'm just going to jump into any old project here, but we might take this project, and for each of these items, make an adjustment of the both the capital and operational expense associated with that item. Generally, I would kind of break these out so that you don't ever put the two things together, but you would do one, if you have capital expenses and operational expenses, you can identify those expenses in these different line items that are part of the project. So that is just one way of kind of identifying overall cost and scope of the project, in addition to, your overall budget that you've requested. Once you've got your projects and your estimates in the system, then it's time to go submit this for basically review and approval and funding allocation. So in Archibus, the next step would be that you go into capital budgeting, and I say you, I don't mean you, I mean those people who are responsible for allocating funding within the project. And you can go into your capital budgeting domain and allocate funding. And so this is where you take that funding that we talked about earlier, and you apply it to each project that you've submitted. So there's a whole process here of adding a new funding source for each year with the amount that you're going to fund for that year. And you might have 5 or 10 years worth of funding here that you're going to use from that funding to fund this particular project. So allocating funding is your step number 3 in the capital planning process. And then, of course, once everything has been identified in terms of the costs and in terms of the estimates and funds, it's going to go to the capital planner for approval. And so approval it's not too complicated in Archibus. There's just a screen where you can go ahead and approve the project, and it updates the status of the project. So again, there's a little process for routing and approving. Approving just means you take that project and you press the approve button or reject, and it updates the status. So that's probably where you want to do a little bit of finagling in terms of customizing this with conditional approvals and sending out email notifications and those types of things. But that would be step 4. It's not too difficult, but approval step is important in Archibus, because it's the difference between a project that's in planning and a project that's now going to show up for execution for the operations teams. So once you get approval, that project will be ready for execution. Now, if it's a capital project, approval might simply mean that you're approving the funding, right? And so once the funding is approved, you might close out the project or keep it open until that project is actually closed. And you might, instead of using this record, you might then generate a series of operational projects that you're going to assign to different teams to manage the actual building of the building or creation of space or whatever it might be that you're doing. So that's how you want to work with your business partner to discuss how is the best way to use all of these functions within your own processes. But basically the 4th step in capital planning is to review. And then, of course, the key thing here is to then start monitoring that project, keeping track of what's happening with it. And there's a series of reports, not only in capital budgeting and under project management, for monitoring what's happening, monitoring projects that are over budget, for example, monitoring the status of projects. There's a project scorecard. I can't click on every single report here, but there's a series of reports that you would use to go through that and keep track of whether the project is falling within budget or not. Okay. Once you get kind of capital planning done and approval made, and you have your I don't want to say budget, because budget can be confusing for everybody, but you've taken the capital budget and you've allocated funding to the project. So you've got your project funds ready. Then you've got approval for everything. Then you're ready to go and execute. So how you execute will be depending on, like I said, it will depend on how you work and your individual processes. You might go back and create new operational projects that are kind of subsets of that larger project, or you might create projects for small scale minor works. It's up to you. But basically the next step is to go into your project management application in Archibus and start developing a lot more detail. So we have a project management console where once the project has been approved, you'll be able to go in and click on some of the details. So I'm going to click on all projects here. And then you'll see that I have all sorts of projects here that are issued, they're completed, they have actions pending, there's information on the console about what needs to get done. But if I go into one of these, I can start building out the information about the project. So for example, I've already got, let's say, class 3 estimates created, but now as I go in and develop these work packages, I can go fill out the details of the work package, what's associated with that work package, what status the package is in, has it been made into a contract, are there any change orders, what are the overall actions associated with the projects, and how many invoices have you received. So invoices, again, are probably going to be coming, you'll either enter them here and push them into your financial system to get paid, or they'll be entered into the financial system and pushed back to Archibus. This is one of the things that you'll work with your partner to figure out. But this is where you kind of add your details. So what you want to do is go in and make sure you've got all your design estimates in, and so on. And then you can actually go and manage your projects with your contractors and teams that are going to be updating it. Now, as part of this screen, you have a lot of different tools. For example, there's a Gantt chart tool, which any project management application has for managing projects. There are also an actions tool, which is where you kind of manage and keep track of the status of different items. I want to point out one of the things which is important, which is going to be step number 3, which is as you're managing projects in Archibus, this is where you want to start communicating between systems, right? You want to start pushing information and updating the finance system with invoices or vice versa. Or you want to update the status of tasks in your project system. So if you're using Microsoft Project or Primavera or any other project application nowadays, you want to create connectors that will regulate or some way of transferring data from your Archibus system to those other systems to keep everybody in sync, you know, whether it's daily or monthly or whatever it might be. And as you can see here, Archibus actually comes with a standard export and import to a Microsoft Project file type. So if you are using Microsoft Project, you can kind of import that and export those files on a regular basis to keep the system up to date. You also have the connector tool in Archibus to connect Archibus to other data sources and again, push or pull data back and forth. But this is a key piece of using Archibus within your capital planning system. This is where you bridge that gap between the finance teams and the project management teams, is taking what's in here and sharing it across and then allowing people access to these screens to monitor the status of the projects, because typically your project management groups will not be able to access your financial systems, and probably your financial guys are not accessing your project system. So you'll need somewhere where people can go and look up information that maybe they would need to get into finance to see, or maybe they would need to get into the project system to see. And although they can't do either one, that common information that everyone needs can be here: status updates, date of completion, invoices that have been raised, and so on. So this is a useful tool for that. And managing those projects is really step 3. And after that, of course, it's just standard project management. Step 4 and 5 in this process is just using the tools to monitor and close out the projects. And there's quite a few different tools in Archibus. There's the project scorecard, which kind of looks at all your projects as an umbrella and sees identifies which projects are kind of behind schedule, which ones are behind, are over cost, are moving too quickly, for example. And then of course there's things like this project quality control dashboard, which allows you to look at multiple projects as a group and see things like the status, which ones are overdue, which ones have been issued and completed, and so on. One of the other kind of useful reports are things like the commitment progress status report in Archibus, which kind of keeps track of what's happening with the project. It starts with the actual project budget, looks at any kind of additions, change orders to the contracts, looks at total invoices that have been submitted thus far, and then it compares and then looks at remaining commitments and so on. So then you have your typical data points like status and start date and end date and so on, and you can drill into the details here from this report. The same type of thing goes for the work in place projection report, which shows you a couple different tabs for all your projects. Of course, you have to choose one here. Let's see if I can find one. I don't think I've got any data in here that's worth looking at, but basically, again, you choose this and the system will identify your work in place projections, which means it takes the budget, divides it by 12 months, and sees how much commitment you've got compared to how much you've actually spent. It looks at your Gantt chart, looks at your total budget versus the projected budget versus the actual invoiced amounts, and then it kind of gives you a cumulative chart and graph. Sorry, we don't have anything to show here, but this would be kind of where you monitor your project. And of course, the last step in all of these processes is on a regular basis to close out and update your projects. And you can do that from a variety of different locations, but probably the simplest is the quality control dashboard, where you edit the status of your projects and you can change these to completed and closed out and so on. So this has been a very quick overview, and trust me, I know it's probably you're probably not thinking that was quick, but this is a quick overview of the capital planning, condition assessment, project management functionality within Archibus. And just as a reminder, we'll go back in here to the steps, do a quick review of the steps, and then we'll try to see if you guys have any questions that we can answer. So again, just to kind of remind you, if you want to get up and running with these applications, first thing you do is just identify some program types, programs, funding, project types, and templates. Then on an annual basis or somewhat quarterly basis, you kind of want to take your assessment data, submit your project request for approval, make sure that you have funding assigned, get the approval, and then kind of on a regular basis have your planning team review and monitor this project status and spend. And lastly, of course, day to day, your operations teams and your project management teams will add detail to the projects, update them, submit information to finance, update the statuses of tasks, and again, regularly monitor. So the nice thing about having all of this in a platform that's available to everybody is you can monitor the information, you can tie it to your space data, you can tie it to your employee data, your maintenance data, or whatever else exists in Archibus for you. And then of course, close out these processes. So to summarize today, what I would like you to go home with is that Archibus will help you bridge that communication gap between the business, the project management professionals who have to execute projects for the business, all the facilities services staffs that are related or do related work with projects, and of course your finance team, who are ultimately going to be identifying how much money you're going to have to execute these projects on a yearly basis. And the key is to define your stakeholders, your internal processes, and what is important for your management for reporting, and then work with your business partner to apply the standard Archibus data schema and processes to what you need. And ultimately, the benefits that you're going to get is real-time availability of your project portfolio budget, spend, remaining commitment, while leveraging your maintenance and space and real property data that exists in the system. So with that, I hope this was useful for everybody. We've just finished our 6th session on capital planning and budgeting. And I think the next session is going to be on compliance and avoiding risk using the Archibus compliance application. So we'll talk about how that works. And with that, thank you, everybody. We'll stick around for some questions and answers. I know we're just at time, but I'll stick around for extra time in case you want to enter anything into the chat. And of course, if you have other questions, you can always contact Iain and send your questions to him, and he'll get back to me. Thank you, Iain.
Thank you, Sean. Like you said, if anybody has any questions, since we are at time, you can email me or Kelly. Our emails were there. We're also attached to the registration emails that you all received. If nobody has any outstanding questions from the chat or the questions box, which I don't see, then I will make sure everybody gets the recording in the next couple of days. And have a good weekend. Thank you all.